to Africa now. The next topic is key areas to focus on in Africa's sustainable development and challenges. We have Mr. Ivo Arrey Mbongaya, founder and director of the African Center of the Community and Development, as well as he's the CEO at the Earth Complex Guest House, Limbe, Cameroon. Being a project and development expert with huge experiences working in diverse sectors including agriculture, food, environment, cultures, education, communications, hospitality, industry, etc. His work has communicated to over 1,000 multimedia publications. Interesting. Welcome, Mr. Ivo.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, and hello everyone. I am Ivo, and so I will be talking on key areas to focus on in Africa's sustainable development and the challenges. Well, Africa has 30% of the world's mineral reserves. It also has 12% of the world's oil and 8% of the natural gas. Africa can boast of 65% of the world's remaining arable land. And as of today, according to the United Nations, Africa's population stands at 1.4 billion people. According to the African Development Bank, Africa's middle class has tripled over the past 30 years to 313 million people, even though COVID-19 is threatening to reduce this bracket by 8 million. Africa has also one of the fastest growing economies in the world, yet it has several issues affecting the continent, including poverty, hunger, energy access, infrastructural gaps, trade gaps, conflicts, climate change, and her incidences, population growth, massive rural-urban migrations, biodiversity loss, inequalities, and governance issues sometimes. In this light, there are certain areas that need to be put in focus. In terms of, the issues that need to be put into focus are poverty. Central Africa has the highest rate of extreme poverty at 54.8%, followed by Southern Africa at 45.1%, Western Africa at 6.8%, and Eastern Africa. Congo accounts for around 10% of global extreme poverty, while Nigeria accounts for about 12%. This means that we need to actually tackle poverty as a major issue towards attaining the sustainable development in Africa. There's also the issue of hunger. 280 million people in Africa suffer from chronic hunger. This amounts to 21% of the population, and 1 out of every 3 infants under 5 is stunted, and close to 30% of the population is malnourished. There are so many gaps in this area that actually need a lot of attention in order that Africa can reach sustainable development. The sector of energy is also something that we need to look at closely and focus on. Over 640 million Africans have no access to electricity. Africa has the lowest access rate of the world at 40%, and only 3 countries in West and Central Africa are on track to actually provide electricity to all of their population by 2030. While these gaps exist, there are windows through which impact investing can actually come in this light. Africa is also lacking in terms of road, rail, water transportation infrastructure. Africa needs, according to the African Development Bank, 170 billion a year by 2025, with an estimated gap of around $100 billion a year. This means that financial institutions need to step up their instruments in Africa. And this means that risk factors or fiduciary risks that is ascribed to Africa will have to be regulated or modified. There's also the issue about climate change. Recent data states that hard and extreme weather or climate change could cost Africa up to $50 billion yearly. Key areas where the costs accrue are in areas around the coast, where there's property loss due to high sea level rises and loss of livelihoods. In 2021 alone, 2.6 million people were displaced from climate-related disasters across the continent. In a continent where there's high rates of desertification and also conflicts in the Sahel, the situation is dire. So, if we move on to the situation of conflicts, there are 19,600 incidences of armed conflicts in the continent as of 2019. This rise in coups in the continent of late in countries like Burkina Faso, Sudan, Mali, and Guinea. This actually means that the governance structure in the continent needs to be revisited and more participatory approaches need to be put in place. Population growth though is a factor as the population is growing at 2.6% annually. But it's also a positive note because in sub-Saharan Africa alone, youthful population will reach about 500 million people by 2050. This means that there will be a lot of people who can work in industries and that can satisfy the demands of corporations that decide to invest in the continent. Also, there's an issue of inequality in the continent, especially with women. 70% of women in Africa are excluded financially. The continent has a $42 billion financial gap between men and women. There is an opportunity here to bank the unbanked, to empower women in politics, in economics, and in other areas where we have gender biases, as well as to educate them in order that they can actually participate more meaningfully to sustainable development in the continent. Another issue is intra-trade. Intra-trade in Africa, between African countries, is just 18%. This needs to be stepped up. The African Continental Free Trade Area, which was just launched, potentially can increase trade between African countries by 50% by 2030 if it is well put into focus. So that is a key area that African governments need to put into place and that their partners need to help to ensure that there is trade between African countries. Just like the volume of trade between Africa and the rest of the world is only 3% now. It means that Africa needs to diversify and stop being dependent on only raw materials and minerals that are leaving the continent and sometimes unchecked. So, the challenges that Africa is facing does not really give a total bleak picture of the continent. A couple of things need to be done to redress the situation. If women are empowered, there will be more workforce, and they're going to contribute to the GDP of the continent, and there's going to be growth. And with the youthful population that is earmarked to double in the continent by 2050, this is very important. Also, with a 313 million population of a middle class that has the capacity to spend up to $20 a day, and that is going to double by 2050, Africa has a potential of spending that industries should invest in the continent in order to leverage from this capacity. In terms of food production, agriculture is very important and is very needed in the continent as it has 65% of the world's remaining arable land. Africa should welcome investments in areas like fisheries, integrated livestock keeping, permaculture, analog forestry, and so on. These things have environmental footprints and also have the capacity to create jobs and also mitigate the impacts of climate change. There's also the need of the transfer of technologies between the North and the South, which as of now is daunting, and we need issues like the recycling of waste, the production of technologies to produce drought-resistant crops, and also rain production technologies to reduce desertification and also increase the arable areas in areas that are affected by fallow lands. So Africa also needs partnerships. Actually, a lot of scholars worldwide have been advocating for this kind of interaction between Africa and the rest of the world. Sullivan and Skelcher in 2002 the Hanan Zumas in 2005, Tuna and Franks, Arrey in 2008. All of these scholars have been saying that partnerships, fair partnerships are necessary for Africa in order that Africa should attain sustainable development. This is very needed. And this can only work if Africa can leverage also from the technologies that are worldwide, like the ICTs, which as of now, only 1% of Africa is leveraging from broadband subscriptions. 6% is leveraging from global internet connections. The continent is facing serious issue in terms of connectivity, and this needs to be stepped up. And also, access needs to be affordable in order that it can impact to the rest of the population. Despite Africa having over 600 million phone users, the choice of what they do with their phones is an issue, as the continent needs more productive services through the internet, banking, and also other new technologies that can improve on access to diverse aspects of sustainable development. There's also the issue about communication, where Africa is underreported in the international news and other media services. And this needs to create a new narrative of the continent, which has over 30% of the world's reserves in natural resources. The continent can boast of diamonds, of cobalt, of salt, of gold, of iron, of uranium, of tropical timber, of fruits, of biodiversity. It has the Congo, which is the second biggest tropical rainforest. It's actually a home of biodiversity, and so it should be what it is, attract eco-tourists, bring in foreign currency, and also bring in foreign investors who are willing to invest in the continent. There's also the need to step down rural-urban migrations. This is leaving rural areas to be underdeveloped and is creating slums in city centers. So therefore, infrastructural development should go towards the empowerment of rural areas and towards the depopulation of city centers to allow for more healthy cities in the 21st century. Also, the energy system needs to be developed and renewable energy needs to be put into focus, as well as in understanding of the context of the continent, which means that situational intelligence on the continent needs to be stepped up. And those who want to work for Africa's sustainable development must work with those who are actors on the ground, who understand the situational intelligence and can transform the continent in a sustainable manner. So the poor are not a passive lot, and Africa is not poor, but seemingly poor from untrained eyes. Thank you very much. That is what I had as a presentation.
Well said, Ivo. I love the closing.
Thank you.
Next, we have Colonel Sandeep Sharma, the Associate Vice President, Prestige Group, India.